Hi Audi buddies, Hassan here from Audi Exam Buddy. I hope you are all well. In today's video, we are going to be exploring the license categories of financial services. I think it's a very important section of the exam as it's related to the Phase Act. And I know that there is some confusion around exactly how to distinguish between the various FSP license categories. So yeah, let's kick off. So firstly, I'm going to define what the FSP license categories are um, in further detail. But before I get to that, I just want to define what a license category is. What's very important to understand is that it refers to the type of services that can be rendered by an FSP. This can very easily be, confused with license subcategories. That is different, as that relates more to products, whereas license categories refers to the type of services that can be rendered by an FSP. So now I'm going to go through each of the various FSP license categories in a little bit more detail. I'm going to explain what each of them entail, what to look out for when identifying each of these license categories, and what's important. And then we'll then end the video off with a few quizzes just to test your understanding of what I just explained. So let's kick off with the first FSP license category. So the first FSP license category is a category 1, or also known as an ordinary FSP. So what's very important to mention is that a category 1 FSP is in a way the most popular or the most common type of FSP. They can render advice and or they can render an intermediary service. That's the first thing to look out for. Advice and intermediary service can be rendered. And the second thing is that they can only act on a client instruction. So what do I mean by that? If a client wants to process anything related to their product, whether that be a change in a beneficiary, updating of details, adding to an investment, etc., all of that can only be processed once a client gives consent and approves that particular process. So that means that the FSP can only act on the client's instruction. They can't act on behalf of the client. So two main things to remember: can render advice and an intermediary service, and secondly, can only act on client instruction. Let's go to the second category of FSP, a category 2 FSP, which is also known as a discretionary FSP. Very important to note, it only renders an intermediary service of a discretionary nature. So discretionary nature means that as opposed to the category 1 FSP, a category 2 FSP can actually act on the client's behalf, and it cannot implement any bulking. So three things to remember there: renders only an intermediary service, can act on behalf of the client, and there's no bulking involved. Let's get to category 2A FSP. So category 2A FSP is a form of category 2 FSP, but with a more specific product associated with it. So similar to a category 2 FSP, a hedge fund FSP or category 2A FSP renders an intermediary service of a discretionary nature, meaning that it can act on the client's behalf. However, it is quite specific in that it deals with hedge funds. So very similar to category 2. Category 2 is a lot broader. Category 2A is a lot more specific in that it is like a discretionary FSP, but dealing in hedge funds. Then the last FSP type or license category, which is a category 3 or administrative FSP. Again, it renders an intermediary service. It can only act on the client's behalf, and it implements bulking in its process. So those are the three things to look at when trying to identify an administrative FSP. So before I get to the three mini quizzes, just a couple of hacks that I'm hoping would help you in identifying what type of FSP you are dealing with. With the category 1 FSP, you'll notice that it's the only FSP category that can render advice. So the moment you see wording such as the FSP or the representative advised the client, recommended a client, proposed a solution, that stipulates advice. And the moment there's advice, it's a category 1 FSP. So the next hack is it's more just about wording that you pick up in the scenario, similar to the first one. So for example, if you see a hedge fund being mentioned in the scenario, the likelihood is that it could be a category 2A FSP. Similarly, if you see uh, bulking methods involved with an FSP, then it could be a guide that it is a category 3 FSP. That's typically the case when they are describing a scenario. However, questions differ, and you'll see now the quiz where it's a negative question. You also need to know what is not included uh, in each of the categories. So let's head off to the quizzes to test your knowledge and understanding of what I've just explained. So the quick quiz number 1. Vivo Brokers renders advice to Mr. Adams by recommending a retirement product for Mr. Adams. Mr. Adams is required to grant consent to effect the investment by signing the relevant application forms. What type of FSP is this? So let's have a look. We see the word advice. That can only mean one answer if you're looking at the type of FSP, but it also tells us that it needs consent from the client. It cannot act on the client's behalf. Therefore, it is a category 1 FSP, also known as an ordinary FSP. Again, why? Advice has been rendered. That's in essence a giveaway for this question. And secondly, it mentions in the story that the application can only be processed once the client has signed the documents. Okay, so let's get on to quiz number 2. Solly Brokers renders an intermediary service to Ms. Peterson, which involves bulking. Authorization is required by Ms. Peterson. So firstly, we see that it's an intermediary service that's mentioned in the story. Secondly, they mention bulking, and thirdly, they mention that we require the client's consent. So, what type of FSP is this? Again, one word given the story gives it away. The answer is a category 3 FSP or an administrative FSP. It involves bulking, and secondly, authorization is required by the client. And can only act on the client's behalf. Quick quiz number 3 and the final quiz for this session. Which of the following is not a characteristic of a hedge fund FSP? Cannot act on the client's behalf, renders an intermediary service. It's related to hedge funds. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about this one. Very important in the exam, the negative questions are usually the ones that people get the most wrong. You really need to read the question a number of times to be able to eliminate the, the options that are correct so that you can identify the incorrect option. So this one, cannot act on the client's behalf, renders an intermediary service or related to hedge funds. So now it's an hedge fund FSP. So C is immediately out of the question because it is a characteristic. Now we need to distinguish between A and B. A hedge fund FSP does indeed render an intermediary service. Remember, all of them render an intermediary service except a category 1 FSP, which means that B is also a characteristic of a hedge fund FSP. Therefore, by process of elimination, the answer is A, cannot act on client's behalf. And this is not a characteristic of a hedge fund FSP. So there you have it, a quick deep dive into FSP license categories, how to identify them, what to look out for, and a few quizzes. Hopefully it enhanced your knowledge and understanding. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to see more of these, please do like, comment, and subscribe to the channel in order to be kept in the loop of future videos. So thank you so much, and we'll drop another video soon. Bye bye.